There's a line in every war that once crossed changes everything. It is not marked on any map. It has no official coordinates. But when it is crossed, both sides feel it instantly. And in the second week of May 2026, Vladimir Putin crossed that line. Not for the first time, but perhaps for the last time, he will be able to do so without consequences that reach all the way to his doorstep. What happened in the span of just 10 days between May 13th and May 24th, 2026 was not just another chapter in a brutal and ongoing conflict. It was a transformation. It was the moment the war stopped being something Russia did to Ukraine and started becoming something Ukraine was doing back to Russia with precision, with intelligence, and with results that no Kremlin press release could fully conceal. Stay with me through this entire video because the picture that emerges by the end is unlike anything you've seen presented in one place. The numbers, the targets, the economic damage, the cracks appearing inside Russia's military machine, it all connects. And when you see how it connects, you will understand why what is happening right now is genuinely historic. Let us begin on the night of May 13th, 2026. That night, air raid sirens across Ukraine did not stop for 11 hours. 11 hours. Most people in the Western world were asleep while Ukraine's cities were being systematically struck by the largest aerial assault the country had faced since the full-scale invasion began in February 2022. When the e-accounting was finally done, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky confirmed that Russia fired more than 1,560 drones and 56 missiles at Ukraine over May 13th and 14th. Read that number again. Over 1,500 drones, dozens of missiles across 2 consecutive days and nights. This was not a targeted military operation. This was a campaign of terror carried out against civilian population centers. The heart of the assault was Kiev. An apartment building in Kiev's Darnitsky district was completely flattened. 3 children born in 2008, 2010, and 2013 were among the victims killed. Search and rescue teams worked through the rubble for hours. 48 people were injured in Kiev alone, including 2 more children. By May 15th, as rescue workers were still clearing debris from the first wave, the death toll from the Kiev attacks reached 24. 24 people who woke up in their homes, in their beds, in a residential building that had nothing to do with military operations, dead because a cruise missile found them first. And this is where something deeply important emerged from the wreckage. Ukrainian forensic teams and Defense Ministry analysts examined the debris of the KH-101 cruise missile that had collapsed the apartment building. What they found was not just a weapon, it was evidence. The KH-101 that struck Kiev was manufactured in the second quarter of 2026, meaning after 21 EU sanctions packages and 3 years of Western export controls, Russia's missile production line was still running. Zelensky brought this finding directly to his Western partners. The components, the microelectronics, the precision guidance materials, they were still reaching Russian factories through sanctions evasion networks. He said that Russia was importing the components necessary for missile production in circumvention of global sanctions and called closing these evasion schemes a genuine priority for all partners. This revelation mattered for a reason that went far beyond the politics of sanctions. It meant that the West's primary non-lethal tool to constrain Russia's war machine, the economic pressure campaign, was failing in its most critical application. While European leaders debated additional packages, the missiles were already built, already loaded, already launched. Think about what that tells you about the gap between political statements and operational reality. Every summit communique about economic pressure on Russia has to be measured against the simple fact that the country manufactured a cruise missile in April 2026 and used it to kill children in Kiev in May 2026. The indictment is contained in the timeline itself. According to Zelensky, the intercept rate was 94% for drones, but only 7% for missiles, a statistic that revealed the most dangerous vulnerability in Ukraine's air defense architecture. Ukraine's drone interception capabilities had become formidable, but missiles of the KH-101 class cruise weapons flying at low altitude with sophisticated guidance systems that had been upgraded at least 4 times since the invasion began were still penetrating the defenses. The basic version of the KH-101 had a range of about 2,500 kilometers and a warhead of up to 500 kilograms. And Russia had ordered hundreds of them, 500 to 25 for 2024, 700 for 2025, and was still producing them in 2026. The factory was running, the pipeline was flowing, the bombs were falling. The scale of destruction across the country was staggering. The attacks of May 13th and 14th were followed by another wave on the night of May 15th, and the assault continued relentlessly. By the time Russia paused its barrage, approximately 180 sites across Ukraine had been struck, including more than 50 residential buildings. This was the largest aerial campaign Russia had mounted since its March 23rd to 24th attack itself, a record at the time when Moscow fired nearly 1,000 drones and missiles in a single operation. But this latest assault dwarfed even that, and it came with unmistakable timing. These strikes came immediately after the end of a brief ceasefire that had allowed Russia to hold its annual Victory Day parade on May 9th. Putin had used the pause in fighting to stage his military spectacle in Red Square. The moment it ended, the bombs returned to Ukrainian residential neighborhoods. This is the pattern that defines this war at its core. Not the battlefield advances, not the diplomatic negotiations, not the summits in European capitals, but this. The moment the cameras stopped rolling on the parade, the drones were already in the air. And Zelensky, standing in the ruins of Kyiv's Darnitsky district, made a decision that every military analyst watching this conflict knew was coming. He would not just respond. He would make Russia feel in its refineries, in its semiconductor plants, in its capital city, and its runways and pipeline networks exactly what it meant to bring the war to civilians. The retaliation would be instant, and it would be brilliant. On the night of May 16th to 17th, 2026, Ukraine made its answer. And that answer was delivered not in diplomatic language, not through a press release, not through another appeal to Western partners for more sanctions, but through the air, in the dark, at altitude, from every direction simultaneously. Ukrainian air defenses tracked what Russian authorities confirmed were approximately 600 Ukrainian drones entering Russian airspace across 14 regions, as well as the annexed Crimean Peninsula. 600 drones, 14 regions simultaneously. This was not a retaliatory strike. This was a statement of strategic capability, and the world needed to hear it clearly. The geographic reach alone was extraordinary. From the western border regions to Moscow itself, from the Black Sea coast to Dagestan in the south, Ukrainian drones were in the air over Russian territory simultaneously. Commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces. Robert Bravdy later confirmed that Ukrainian drones struck a Russian patrol boat near Kaspisk in Russia's Dagestan Republic, located nearly 1,000 kilometers from the front line. 1,000 kilometers. Think about what that means. Operationally, Ukraine is no longer fighting a defensive war at the contact line. It is projecting force across the entire depth of Russian territory from the occupied coastal strips all the way to the Caspian Sea. This is not the behavior of a country on the verge of collapse. This is the behavior of a military force that has fundamentally changed the nature of the conflict. But the psychological and strategic centerpiece of the entire operation was Moscow. The Russian capital, most heavily defended city in the country, ringed by layered air defense networks that Moscow's own military leadership had spent years building and publicly boasting about, was the primary target. Russian authorities confirmed that approximately 120 drones were intercepted over Moscow and the surrounding region within 24 hours. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin was posting updates to Telegram in the middle of the night as explosions rang out across the metropolitan area. Residents of Khimki, Zelenrad, Kraorsk, and Pudalkovo, wealthy commuter districts northwest of the capital, were watching fires light up the sky from their windows. The carpet plan was activated, temporarily paralyzing operations at Saratov Airport and other major Moscow air hubs, causing massive flight delays. Saratov is Russia's busiest international airport. When Saratov shuts down, it is not an inconvenience. It is a signal to every traveler, every business executive, every foreign diplomat transiting through Moscow that the war has come home. And now, let us talk about what the drones actually hit. because this is where the brilliance of Ukraine's operation becomes clear in a way that numbers alone cannot convey. The May 17th strike was not random. It was not an attempt to terrorize civilians. Every major target selected in the Moscow region was a node in Russia's military-industrial machine. In Ukraine, struck them with surgical sequencing. The Moscow oil refinery in Kapatna, which was temporarily shut down for security reasons following the attack, was the fuel artery feeding the Russian capital's logistics network. But the refinery was only the beginning. As a result of the strike near Moscow, the Angstrom enterprise in Zelenrad was hit. The facility produces microcircuits for precision weapons and is considered an important element of Russia's military-industrial complex and is under strict U.S. sanctions due to its role in supplying semiconductors for military use. Let that land for a moment. The Angstrom plant under American sanctions, identified by Western intelligence as a critical supplier of military electronics, was not protected by the layers of air defense sitting above Moscow. It was not untouchable. It was burning. The Elma Technology Park in Zelenograd, a site bringing together 150 companies, some involved in the Russian defense industry, was also struck. Ukraine was not hitting random industrial zones. It was hitting the precise collection of facilities where Russia's military capability was being manufactured and assembled. Then came the target that intelligence analysts across multiple Western agencies had been watching for years. OSCENT channels reported an attack on the MKB Raduga plant, also located in the Moscow region, a Russian engineering design bureau specializing in the development of cruise missiles and other missile technology. This is the facility that designs and produces the Kh-101 cruise missiles, the exact weapon Russia used to flatten an apartment building in Kiev's Darnitsky district and kill 3 children just days before. Ukraine struck the factory that built the weapon that killed its civilians. The symmetry of that operation is not coincidental, it is doctrine. And on the Amzo same night, the Snekhnogorsk fuel loading station in Moscow Oblast was reportedly struck and set on fire, a critical site in the fuel pipeline network used for storing and transporting gasoline and diesel supplies. What happened in the skies above Moscow that night also revealed something that Russian military analysts had been refusing to publicly acknowledge. The air defense network protecting the capital, the network that Putin had used for years as a symbol of Russia's invulnerability. The system of over 100 S-300, S-400, and S-500 launchers backed by Pensier close defense batteries was not stopping Ukrainian drones from reaching their targets. 3 people were killed and another 16 injured in the Moscow region, with damage confirmed at the Angstrom plant, the Kapatnia oil refinery, the Sol-Nekhnogskaya and Volodar-Skoye oil pumping stations, and a number of apartment blocks and private homes. But here is the critical detail that Russian officials were desperate to suppress. The damage to residential buildings was not caused by Ukrainian drones successfully striking homes. It was caused by Russian air defense missiles. Interceptors fired at the incoming Ukrainian drones that missed and fell back onto the very neighborhoods they were designed to protect. Russian citizens were filming this from their balconies and posting it online before the authorities could implement their new media restrictions. One Moscow resident wrote that it was complete madness. Their own air defense was hitting the neighboring building. Another said they had never been so frightened in their life. This was not what Putin's propaganda machine had promised them, and no amount of censorship was fast enough to stop the footage from spreading. Russia subsequently introduced new restrictions on reporting the aftermath of drone strikes, banning the publication of photos, videos, or details without official authorization, with fines ranging from 3,000 to 5,000 rubles for individuals up to 200,000 rubles for legal entities. And when a government's first response to a military event is to ban citizens from filming it, you already know the event did not go well for that government. The Kremlin's information management machine, already strained by years of war, was cracking under the weight of an operation it could not spin. Zelensky's message, delivered directly to the Russian people through his social media posts, was unambiguous. Ukrainian long-range sanctions had reached the Moscow region, and his message to the Russian people was equally clear. Their state must end its war. If Moscow was the psychological blow, then what came next was the financial one. And in many ways, the financial dimension of Ukraine's campaign is more devastating to Russia's long-term war-fighting ability than any single military strike. Because wars are not won solely on the battlefield. They're won in the budget, they're won in the supply chains, they're won in the fuel depots and the refinery tanks and the procurement lines that keep tanks moving and artillery firing and missiles launching. And what Ukraine has been doing since May 17th, systematically, methodically, relentlessly, is attacking every one of those arteries simultaneously. 4 days after the Moscow strikes on the night of May 20th to 21st, Ukrainian drones traveled further than most analysts had publicly predicted possible. Ukrainian forces attacked the Sizan oil refinery in the Samara Oblast, a target located more than 800 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. 800 kilometers. To put that in geographic perspective, that is roughly the distance from London to Edinburgh and back. That is deep inside Russia's industrial heartland, a region Moscow had long considered completely beyond Ukraine's strike range. Zelensky personally confirmed the strike on Telegram. A massive fire was recorded at the facility, which has a processing capacity of up to 9 million tons of oil per year, and supplies fuel to the Russian Air Force and military units in central and southern Russia, while also exporting petroleum products via the Volga River, the Caspian Sea. This was not a symbolic strike. The Sizan refinery is a RAS facility owned by Russia's state energy champion, the company whose revenues flow directly into the Kremlin's war budget. Hitting Caesar meant hitting Putin's wallet. And the commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces confirmed something even more remarkable when announcing the strike. Robert Brady stated that Syzran was the 11th Russian oil refinery targeted by Ukraine during the month of May alone. 11 refineries in a single month. This is not a series of opportunistic strikes. This is a sustained, coordinated campaign operating on an industrial tempo that Russia's air defense network has proven completely unable to stop. Reuters reported that the combined annual processing capacity of refineries, now fully or partially offline, exceeded 83 million tons, roughly a quarter of Russia's total refining output. The affected plants previously accounted for more than 30% of Russia's gasoline production and around 25% of its diesel fuel output, a quarter of Russia's refining capacity gone. Not by Western sanctions, not by diplomatic pressure, by Ukrainian drones flying through the night sky over the Russian steppe. Ukraine has carried out 158 strikes on Russian oil refineries since the start of the full-scale invasion on February 24, 2022, hitting at least 24 of the country's 33 largest refining plants, with Russia's oil refining volume falling to its lowest level since 2009 as a result of the campaign. Think about what that number represents. Russia spent decades building its refining infrastructure. It underpins the country's entire export economy, its government revenue model, and the fuel supply for its military forces. Ukraine has now touched 24 of the 33 facilities that matter most. Only the refineries east of the Urals in Omsk and Anarsk remain outside Ukraine's current strike range. The rest are all reachable, and the pace of strikes is accelerating, not slowing. The economic consequences of this campaign are now registering in Russia's own official data, which is remarkable given how much Moscow manipulates its financial reporting. Russia's overall budget deficit for the first 3 months of 2026 reached 4.58 trillion rubles, already surpassing the government's full year's target of 3.79 trillion rubles before the year was even a quarter complete. The revenue drop came as oil export volumes declined following repeated large-scale Ukrainian drone strikes on major Russian export infrastructure. Russia blew through its entire annual deficit projection in 90 days. By January 2026 alone, federal budget revenues were down 11.6%, 6% year-on-year, weighed down by a 50.2% drop in oil and gas revenues to just 393 billion rubles. Oil and gas taxes account for roughly a quarter of Russia's government revenue. When that quarter collapses by half in a single month, the downstream effects on everything from military procurement to social spending are severe and immediate. As a result of the refinery strike campaign, Russia introduced a ban on gasoline exports in April, which remained in effect through the end of July. When a major oil-producing country has to ban its own gasoline exports to protect domestic supply, that is not a sign of economic strength. That is a country scrambling to prevent a fuel crisis at home while simultaneously trying to supply an active war front. The Russian military's diesel consumption is enormous. Every tank, every armored vehicle, every logistics convoy, every generator at every forward operating base runs on fuel that has to be transported from somewhere. And the somewhere it was coming from is now burning. The Institute for the Study of War, which produces some of the most rigorously sourced assessments of the conflict, weighed in directly on what this campaign means at the operational level. ISW assessed that Ukraine's intensified mid-range strike campaign since early 2026 has degraded Russian forces' ability to conduct offensive operations across the theater. That assessment matters because it connects the economic damage directly to battlefield outcomes. Russia cannot sustain offensive pressure if its fuel supply chain is being systematically dismantled. Every refiner Ukraine takes offline is fewer liters of diesel reaching the front. Every pumping station that burns means a slower logistics convoy. Every barrel per day that drops from Russia's processing capacity is one less dollar of a war revenue for the Kremlin. Ukrainian strikes on Russia's energy sector had caused at least 60 billion rubles, approximately $714 million, in direct damage as of an RFL investigation in March 2025. And that figure predated the May 2026 campaign entirely. The cumulative damage since then, accounting for the refinery shutdowns, the pipeline strikes, the pumping station fires, and the repeated attacks on the same facilities before they can fully repair, is almost certainly substantially higher. The repair timeline is not a simple equation either. When Ukraine strikes a refinery's primary distillation unit, Russia cannot simply fix it in a week and resume operations. The specialized equipment, the replacement parts, the technical expertise, all of it takes months to source and install, especially under sanctions that are limiting Russia's access to Western industrial technology. And Ukraine's doctrine is to hit the same target again before repairs are complete, resetting the timeline from zero each time. This where the strategic architecture of Ukraine's campaign reveals its full sophistication. It is not designed merely to cause damage. It is designed to cause irreparable damage, the kind that compounds faster than Russia can respond to it, the kind that drains the war, chest at a rate the Kremlin's budget planners did not model and cannot contain. Putin built his entire war economy on the assumption that oil revenues would sustain Russian military spending indefinitely. That assumption is now structurally compromised. The question is no longer whether Ukraine can hurt Russia economically. The evidence that it can is overwhelming. The question now is how much longer Russia can absorb these losses before the financial mathematics of this war fundamentally change. And then came May 24th, 2026 today, the morning this video was written. And what happened in the pre-dawn hours over Kiev brought everything full circle in a way that reveals with brutal clarity exactly where this war now stands and exactly what kind of leader Vladimir Putin has become. Putin ordered his military to retaliate after blaming Ukraine for a drone strike on a college dormitory in Stabilsk, a Russian-occupied town in eastern Luhansk. Russia claimed 18 people were killed. Ukraine denied targeting the college, stating it only struck military facilities. The Russian narrative was familiar, a contested claim, an alleged Ukrainian atrocity, a justification preloaded into state media before the retaliatory strike even launched. And then, in the early hours of May 24th, the retaliation came. The Russian army launched 690 targets against Ukraine, 90 missiles and 600 drones of various types with Kiev as the primary target. But it was not the volume of the assault that made the world stop. It was the weapon Russia chose to use. For only the third time in this entire war, Putin deployed the Oreshnik. Russia launched the Oreshnik hypersonic missile, a system capable of carrying nuclear warheads, as part of one of its biggest bombardments of Kiev since the war began. The assault killed at least 4 people, injured over 80, and caused significant damage to residential buildings and schools across the capital. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko confirmed damage in every single district of the city. Zelensky said he had warned citizens of an imminent Oreshnik strike based on intelligence reports hours before it hit. The Oreshnik struck Bilita, a city roughly 50 miles south of Kiev. It was the third time Russian forces had used this missile during the full-scale invasion. Now, understand what this means strategically. The Oreshnik is not a conventional weapon of opportunity. Putin claimed in 2024 that the missile travels like a meteorite, cannot be stopped by air defense, and can obliterate underground bunkers. It is a nuclear-capable intermediate-range ballistic missile, the kind of weapon arms control treaties were designed specifically to eliminate. Its use is not a military decision in the conventional sense. It is a political signal, and the signal Putin is sending tells you everything about where he stands. The EU's foreign affairs chief called Moscow's use of the Oreshnik a political scare tactic and reckless nuclear brinkmanship. When a leader reaches for his most extreme weapons not to achieve a battlefield objective, but to frighten his opponents into stopping, that is not strength. That is the behavior of a man who is losing the argument and knows it. Look at the pattern from beginning to end and ask yourself what it reveals. Putin uses a brief ceasefire to parade tanks through Red Square, then immediately fires 1,600 drones and missiles at Kiev the moment the parade ends, killing 24 civilians, including 3 children. Ukraine retaliates with 600 drones across 14 Russian regions, strikes the semiconductor factory supplying Russia's missiles, burns the oil refinery 17 kilometers from Moscow, hits the design bureau that builds the cruise missiles used against Ukrainian apartment buildings, and shuts down a quarter of Russia's refining capacity, all in 10 days. Then Putin, unable to stop any of it, reaches for a hypersonic ballistic missile capable of carrying nuclear warheads and fires it at a Ukrainian city.